The member for North Sydney.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, listening carefully at that question time, I was able to reflect with my colleagues on the fact that perhaps we didn't pick it up, but in the last days of Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister, the member for Griffith, he became increasingly shrill when answering questions in question time. He was clearly a man under pressure, and perhaps we didn't pick it up in the way that we should have, but we did notice that the event had occurred. And what I picked up today, and what my colleagues picked up today, is that this week our Prime Minister has been incredibly shrill. Our Prime Minister has been extremely nasty, and I must say has begun to answer every question with a nasty statement, personally attacking the individual who asked the question. Now, quite clearly, not only is she missing her Praetorian Guard that normally a Prime Minister has that is capable of delivering the blows in question time, but what is most surprising about it is that the Prime Minister should fall into this form so quickly after an election. Just a few months after an election, the Prime Minister seems to have not only her own backbench acting like an ill-disciplined bunch, be it the member for Capricornia, who today came out and said that she supports gay marriage, even though the Prime Minister herself said that she doesn't, or the member for Wills, who said it yesterday and talked about gay marriage, and all at the same time that the Minister for Trade had said these are the things that should not distract us. But of course the Prime Minister has had cause to be distracted, be it the words of Graham Richardson, Citizen Richardson, be they the words of Paul Howes, Citizen Howes, be they the words of Carl Bitter, Citizen Bitter. This is a government that before our eyes is fracturing. And the problem for Australian families is that they are being left out of the equation. Australian families are no longer being discussed by this government. Australian families are the victims of this government. Australian families are being left behind that a government that has so carelessly forgotten their interests. It no longer is talking about the cost of electricity, it's the coalition that's talking about the cost of electricity. The Labor Party in government doesn't talk about the 13% increase in the cost of water, it's the coalition that talks about it. The Labor Party doesn't talk about the increase in hospital prices of 7%, it's the coalition that talks about it. The Labor Party, which pretends to care about childcare, doesn't talk about childcare, which has gone up 7% in the last year alone, well above the inflation figure, and let alone education expenses more generally. They've gone up 6%. It's the coalition that is raising these issues. It is the coalition that has laid down a plan. It is the coalition that raises the challenge of rising interest rates. It's the coalition that has the courage to lay down a 9-point plan to get more competition into banking. It's the coalition that has the courage to introduce into this place legislation that takes on the big banks and oil companies on price signalling. It is the coalition that is getting on with the job of doing something for those families that are struggling under the everyday increases in prices. And that is because we understand what people are going through. And many Australians are asking themselves, how is it that we're in a mining boom? How is it that we are meant to have this great economy, this wonderful economy, as the Treasurer and the Prime Minister keep saying the strongest economy in the OECD? If that is the case, so many Australian families are saying, why am I paying more and getting less? That's what they're asking themselves. And it's a reasonable comment. Quite clearly the Australian economy is patchy. Quite clearly the Australian economy is performing at different speeds. Quite clearly there are some people who are doing exceptionally well. And we say, hurrah, we want that. We want our country to be strong. But there are so many Australian families that are wondering now how they are going to pay for Christmas presents. And I'm serious about it, because if you've got a $300,000 mortgage, in the last fortnight alone, your mortgage repayment after tax has gone up $1,000. After tax. And there may well be lots of economic justification for the RBA moving. And it may well be the case that there are so-called justifications from the banks for moving above the RBA, none of which I buy. But I say to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, I say to you emphatically, to simply ignore the impact on Australian families is wrong. The Leader of the Opposition won't do it, the Coalition won't do it, because we are prepared to stand up for people that at the moment are voiceless in Gillard, Australia. We are prepared to speak for those people. We are prepared to recognise that the cost of living is hurting, that a new carbon tax will increase electricity bills. If Paul Howes says it, believe it to be true, because he is simply reflecting what is common sense, that if you put a carbon price and a tax on electricity, it will go up in price. And that is something that every Australian family is going to face. And on top of that, with rising interest rates, and economists, be they compassionate people or not, they can at times be soulless. So when the markets factor in an increase of at least another 50 basis points from the Reserve Bank over the next 12 months, that means more hurt for everyday Australian families. That means higher interest rates, higher credit card rates, higher small business loans. And they're wondering how they're going to pay it. And they're right to. Because I thought, as they thought, and the rhetoric says, that education is free. But education's gone up 7% in the last 12 months. And we're meant to have a free universal medical system, but we know it isn't free because hospital and medical services have increased 7%. And we know that if you live in the outer western suburbs of Sydney or Melbourne or in the suburbs of Brisbane or any other major capital city, or for that matter so many regional cities, it's very hard to own a home unless both parents are working. And so many of those parents desperately need childcare. It's not a choice, it's not a lifestyle choice anymore. The cost of housing is so beyond Australian families that we now have one of the least affordable home entry points in the developed world. Believe that. And it is directly linked to the fact that there is insufficient supply, because you've got state governments that are more focused on re-election than they are on making hard decisions about zoning. And it's also about a political party in the Labor Party that is more focused on preserving its power than making its power work to the benefit of the people. The fundamental point here is, for everyday Australians, there is less and less choice. There is less choice in the cost of housing. There is less choice in the cost of electricity. There is less choice in the cost of telecommunications. There is less choice in hospital care. There is less choice in education. They have to pay these bills. They have no choice. And according to the official data, the CPI, which increasingly the Reserve Bank itself has said, is not a proper indicator of the everyday cost of living. The Reserve Bank has recognised that. The CPI comes in at a reasonable level, and why? Because computers and flat-screen TVs have come down 20%, primarily because of the strong Australian dollar and because of the fact that those products in general have come down out of China. But that distorts the figure. It distorts the figure. Because you know what? If you're really struggling to meet the bills, you're not focused on a flat-screen TV. You're focused on how to pay the electricity bill and the water bill, how to pay for school uniforms, how to pay for school excursions, whether your kids can come to Canberra or not. They're the bills that people fret on. And as we approach Christmas, it hasn't been the usual practice of the Reserve Bank to increase interest rates in December, because that is like a body blow to the heart of retail in Australia. But that body blow has been delivered. It's been delivered by the Reserve Bank, it's been delivered by the banks, but it's all come about because of this government. This government's inability to control its expenditure. This government's inability to make a hard decision. And that's what I said to the Prime Minister across the table today. You have no ticker. And she doesn't have any ticker. She has no courage She has no core, because the Prime Minister does not understand that in order to deliver real reform, in order to share the opportunity of the future, you have to make hard decisions. It was this coalition, including the Shadow Minister for Finance and my colleagues, who went with courage to the election and announced $50 billion of cuts to government expenditure. And they were hard cuts. And we know they weren't popular, but they were the right thing to do. And they were the right thing to do because we know that when you have the most generous terms of trade in 50 years, we know that when you have an economy growing at above 3%, we know that when you have inflation at a reasonable level, if you do not run budget surpluses, when the bad times come again, you are ill-prepared. We know that because we have been there. We have been there. We know that you can never climb a mountain unless you do the training. We know that you can never deliver security into the future unless the government itself has prepared the nation for the darkest of days. We know that because we have been there. And we are scathing, and we will not let up at all on this government for its lack of courage, because we've displayed the courage that it does not have. We're the ones that have been prepared to do the yards, to get the budget back to surplus faster, to ensure that we can start to pay down some of that debt. And the debt is going to be a major issue into the future. Bear this in mind. Ireland and Portugal are on the threshold of absolute collapse, and Spain is not so far away. And in 2011, you are going to see, 2011-12, you are going to see one of the biggest bond refinancing programs the world has ever seen, on any measure, as all the sovereign debt of these countries that have borrowed so much over the years needs to be borrowed again. And on top of that, corporations rolling over their debt means that ultimately Australia should not be in the position where it's going with a begging bowl to the rest of the world, begging the world to pay for school halls that are still being built 4 years after the negative quarter, begging for the world to pay for all of the waste, the record waste from the Gillard government and the Rudd government, begging the world to pay for the massive deficits and debt that have been left behind by countless state Labor governments. And we're going to the world and begging them for their money at exactly the wrong time, which puts our economy in peril. It puts our welfare at peril at a time when we are sucking the juices out of the world, trying to take advantage of a mining boom and a commodity boom, and when we need that capital to grow the mines. I say to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a difficult time to run the Australian economy, and the government has got it dead wrong. And for every Australian family, they know that if they are spending more than they are collecting, if their debt continues to grow, then the day will come when the bank comes knocking. Well, so too for our country. If we continue to borrow money at $100 million a day, at a time when we are in a prosperous environment, then I say to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, when the tough times come, there are few bullets left in the gun of the government to try and ensure that Australians get through the darkest hours. This is a significant moment. We will have Australians fretting about Christmas. We will have Australians fretting about the bills that come after Christmas. We will have Australians that wonder why they've been left behind by the Gillard government. I say to those Australians on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition and my colleagues, we will not forget you. We will not leave you behind. We will always speak for you, and we in the Coalition will have the courage to make the hard decisions that ensure that Australia can get through the tough times and your families can get through the tough times. Yeah.